Well, hello again. It's me, Miss Redburn. I don't think I said that the last time, but I'm here to read to you another story today. And I think it might be one that some of you are familiar with, but forgive me and go with it anyway because it's a really fun read with great illustrations, and I'm hoping it will inspire you to do some at-home play, maybe with puppetry, hint hint, or some other kind of balloon art. But with no further ado, I'm going to read to you today Balloons Over Broadway. And this one is written and illustrated by Melissa Sweet, who actually came to our school a couple years ago and spoke to us, and she was so fabulous. And her creative process, it seems so amazing. And I just love all her books. I really do. But this is one of my favorites, and I have it here at home because I read it with my own kiddos, especially every year at Thanksgiving when the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade happens, because this is the true story of the puppeteer of the Macy's Parade. So I thought I'd share it with you guys. Maybe you will grow to love it some more every time you hear it if you've heard it already. Stay with me till the end. Balloons Over Broadway, The True Story of the Puppeteer of Macy's Parade by Melissa Sweet. Guys, this is him, Tony Stark, the real life him. Tony Sarg, sorry, not Stark. That's Iron Man. Sarg. It even says here, Sarg rhymes with ARG. Alright. He lived from 1880 to 1942, so if you're thinking in your head, is he still alive? He is not. He lived a long time ago, but his parade has lived on. So let's read about how he came to be the puppeteer of the Macy's Parade. All right, here goes. Let's see if I can do a better job this time of lining up the pictures for you on the screen. All right. Anthony, Tony, Frederick, Sarg. Every little movement has a meaning of its own. Tony Sarg. From the time he was a little boy, Tony Sarg loved to figure out how to make things move. He once said he became a marionette man when he was only 6 years old. His father had asked him to feed their chickens at 6:30 in the morning every day. Tony had an idea. What if he could feed the chickens without leaving his bed? He rigged up some pulleys and ran rope from the chicken coop door to his bedroom window. That night he spread chicken feed outside the chicken coop door. The next morning, Tony pulled on the rope and the door to the chicken coop opened. The chickens ate their breakfast. Tony stayed snug in his bed, and his dad, so impressed, never made Tony do another chore. How inventive is that? Guys, I think you're going to notice, as I keep reading this story, that character trait of Tony's, that inventiveness, that creativity, it comes up again and again throughout his life. See if you can figure out what I mean by that. When Tony grew up, he moved to London, where he discovered that no one was making marionettes for kids anymore. So out of wood, cloth, and string, Tony began to make puppets. He figured out ways to make his marionettes movements so lifelike that they performed as if they were real actors. Word soon spread about Tony's amazing marionettes. It says down here, when Tony moved to New York City, the Tony Sarg marionettes began performing on Broadway. In the heart of New York City, in Herald Square, was the biggest store on earth, R.H. Macy's department store. Macy's had heard about Tony's puppets and asked him to design a puppet parade for the store's holiday windows. So Tony made new puppets based on storybook characters, then attached them to gears and pulleys to make them move. You might recognize Humpty Dumpty. Macy's Wondertown. In Macy's Wondertown windows, Tony's mechanical marionettes danced across the stage as if by magic. All day long, they performed to shoppers jostling for a better look. But Macy's had an even bigger job in store for Tony. Many of the people working at Macy's were immigrants, and as the holiday approached, they missed their own holiday traditions of music and dancing in the streets. Macy's agreed to put on a parade for their employees, and they hired Tony to help. Tony, too, was an immigrant, so he loved the idea of creating a parade based on the street carnivals from all over the world. He made costumes and built horse-drawn floats, and Macy's even arranged to bring in bears, elephants, and camels from the Central Park Zoo. The animals, well, look at that picture. Isn't that an amazing illustration, guys? I don't know if you notice it, but since this is the parade, this is also a real live image, or a real image of New York City, a map of New York City back at that time to show you the parade route as it went through the city. And then this is more of the author, illustrator's take on what the early parade looked like. So the animals joined hundreds of Macy's employees on Thanksgiving Day, 1924, winding their way from Harlem to Herald Square. It was a dazzling parade. In fact, Macy's first parade was such a success that they decided to have one every year on Thanksgiving Day to celebrate America's own holiday. Each year the parade grew. But when Macy's brought in lions and tigers, in addition to the bears, elephants, and camels, the animals roared and growled and frightened the children. Could you imagine? Macy's asked Tony to replace the animals. "Tony, can you think of something spectacular?" "Okay." Tony hoped to replace the animals with some kind of puppets, but his marionettes were less than 3 feet tall. He would have to make much larger puppets in order for them to be seen in the parade. And how could he make them strong enough to hold up in bad weather, yet light enough to move up and down in the streets? Tony knew of a company in Ohio that made blimps. That's a blimp. Out of rubber. The perfect material for any weather. When he called the company and showed them his sketches, they agreed to make what Tony wanted. Still, how would Tony make his puppets move? Then Tony had an idea from an Indonesian rod puppet in his toy collection. Can you guess what his idea might be? Notice the sticks. On Thanksgiving Day, Tony's creatures, some as high as 16 feet, spilled into the streets, and the crowd cheered wildly. Part puppet, part balloon, the air-filled rubber bags wobbled down the avenues, propped up by wooden sticks. Wow. By now, the sidewalks were so packed with people that only those in the first few rows could really see the parade. Tony realized his puppets would have to be even bigger and higher off the ground, and though the sticks helped to steer the puppets, they were stiff and heavy. Tony wanted his balloons to articulate, to move and gesture, more like puppets. But how? With a marionette, the controls are above, and the puppets hang down. But what if the controls were below and the puppet could rise up? During the next year, Tony set his new idea into motion. This time, he asked the company in Ohio to make balloons out of rubberized silk, as strong as rubber, but lighter than rubber alone. Most important, Tony ordered the balloons to be filled not just with air, but with helium too. Since helium is lighter than air, it would make the balloons rise. Once the puppets were completed, they were deflated and shipped back to Tony in New York. They did not know if everything would go as planned. What if the balloons are filled with too much helium? What if one hits a sharp object? Will they fit under the L, the elevated train track? It was still dark on Thanksgiving morning when Tony filled the balloons with helium, tethering them down with sandbags. By 1 p.m., the sidewalks were packed with people ready for the parade. Then one by one, Tony cut the lines to the sandbags. Let's have a parade! Since I was not holding it close for you. There you go. What? I love a good vertical picture. Although it's hard for you to see. There you go. And the magnificent upside down marionettes rose up to the skies. So cool. Nodding and waving to the crowds below, they sailed past Central Park. They sailed down Broadway. They shimmied and swayed through canyons of New York City. High above the crowds, they flounced in the afternoon wind, pulling the rope handlers this way and that. Yet with every heave-ho, the balloons gestured and articulated like wild puppets, and the crowd screamed for more. After the balloons were eased under the L, they ended in front of Macy's at Tony's Wondertown windows. It was a parade New Yorkers would never forget. And from that day on, every Thanksgiving morning, crowds had lined the sidewalks of New York City to see what new balloons would rise to the sky for Macy's famous parade. Tony Sarg, the puppeteer who loved to figure out how to make things move, had set the stage, with a little rigging for a puppet to be anything anyone could imagine it to be. And that's the end. If you ever get a chance to read this book in person, there's an awful lot of factual information that Melissa Sweet included in the end of the book in the author's note about Tony Sarg. And again, there's so many more cool things about her illustrations that you should totally get a closer look at if you ever have the book in person, so that you can see some of the neat details that she included. One of the reasons why I love this book so much, and besides the great writing and illustrations, is that as a kid, every year, we would spend the morning of Thanksgiving watching the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade on TV. And when I was in my 20s, you don't need to know how old I am now, when I was in my 20s, I actually got to go there in person and see it as well. And I loved it so much. So hopefully this Thanksgiving, if you get to see the parade again, you'll think about Tony Sarg and his start to the parade, and maybe this will inspire you to maybe make a puppet this week, or do some balloon art, maybe draw on a blown up balloon and float it up like it's a puppet at the parade. So it was good to talk to you again and read to you, and I hope we can read together again soon. Bye!